Guys, if you want to find a seat, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning to you all. We have been working through the book of Genesis this summer, and we've been noticing kind of from the beginning in the book of Genesis, there's this inescapable tension wired into creation itself, that every creature and every culture will face the threat of chaos, like it's unable to be organized peacefully, and barrenness, that there won't be enough for everyone to live and flourish. And so these themes run throughout the story of Israel and play a big role in today's text. If you remember, Abraham and Sarah faced barrenness until Sarah had Isaac. And then they went to this neighboring people and found a wife for Isaac and found a very strong woman named Rebekah. And she was smart and tough and faithful, but she had the same problem as Sarah. She was barren as well. And we don't know how long they waited, but we know as long enough Isaac was just begging God for a child. Finally, Rebekah became pregnant, and it was a difficult pregnancy. She had these painful, violent spasms and kicking. The Hebrew phrase is "Vayitro tzeitzu habanim bekerba." It's kind of an odd phrase that means but struggled or crushed or bruised or broke even these sons within her. And by saying sons, the writers kind of let us in on the secret that Rebekah doesn't know yet. She's carrying twins, and they're fighting with each other in the womb. And Rebekah asks, Imken lama zek anoki. It's a weird phrase as well. It's kind of truncated right in the middle. It's something like, if this is so, or if so, why this ... to me. She doesn't finish the thought. And she's meaning to ask, why all the kicking, why all the pain? But it's sort of like a Freudian slip. She's really asking an existential question. What is my life? What is the meaning of all of this? And she goes to inquire of God, and God answers her saying, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. So the answer to Rebekah's question, like, what is the meaning of my life, is this odd prediction. You have two nations in your womb. One will be stronger than the other, and the older must serve the younger. It's a strange answer to the question, why do I exist? But it'll turn out to be spot on for Rebekah, and will really guide her actions in our story for today. From the beginning, the threat of barrenness always hangs over the story of God. Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, they all struggled to have children. But the theme of chaos is there as well. It's often symbolized by the struggle between older and younger brothers. And often younger brothers end up ruling their older siblings, which is out of order. It's chaotic. Older sons are meant to rule. In fact, this practice of privileging the oldest son is called primogeniture. It's the right of the firstborn to inherit all or most of their family's estate. And in the ancient world, this is just how it worked. Everyone practiced primogeniture. Families were like kind of tribal nations, and each family had this patriarch who was responsible for everything in the family. They had to be the chief agronomist and farmer. If the crops failed, they had to go raiding, which means they had to be a commander of a militia. They would be the ambassador and chief diplomat, the mayor, the sheriff, the prosecutor, the judge. They had to settle all internal disputes and hand out punishments, but not in a way that would make them enemies. They had to decide when to stay and when to go. They had to delegate enough responsibility to like their brothers and children and uncles and cousins to keep them all happy, but not elevate them high enough they might become a rival. They served as priests, presiding over weddings and funerals and worship. And so you can just imagine the damage that could be done if they put like a foolish, selfish, petulant, undisciplined person in charge of their people. Like, seriously, try to imagine living in a society where you put a foolish, selfish, petulant, undisciplined person in charge of the whole society. If you take a leader who lacks wisdom and character and basic goodness and ask them to do a really complicated, nuanced, delicate, high-stakes job that requires wisdom and requires tact and patience and quiet strength, but also empathy and goodness. Eventually, that leader will tank the whole system. And so in the ancient world, these families, tribal families, they could fail like quickly. One or two bad leaders and it was over for a family. It's partly why we remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph, and Moses, and Joshua. And so primogeniture was this practice of grooming the eldest sons, just paying all the attention to them so they would be qualified to lead a family because it was just so much responsibility. It all went to the firstborn. And there was a big upside to this. The eldest son lived with wealth and privilege from an early age. They had every advantage in education, in training, exposure to other cultures, opportunity, just way more than their other siblings. And that meant when their father died, they would inherit everything, all the land, the livestock, the money, but also all the responsibility. And the future of the family would be on their shoulders. And this was the norm in the ancient cultures. Part of how we know this is anytime it didn't happen, the Bible makes note of it. When the older brother doesn't become the patriarch, it's kind of a scandal. It's out of order. But in the story of God, this happens a lot. And it could be destabilizing. I mean, it could create a lot of chaos because it subverted the normal order of things in that time, in that place, in their culture. And so barrenness and chaos, these primeval threats, are symbolized by barren wives and then these ruling younger brothers, because it's out of order. Comes up a lot in the Hebrew Bible. All these important women needed God's help to have a child. Think of Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel. Think of Samson's mother. Or remember the story of Samuel and his mother, Hannah. Think of all the younger brothers who ruled. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're all younger brothers. Ephraim, Joseph, Judah, King David, for heaven's sakes. And the Hebrew people noticed this, that these things happened so often. These barren women had children. These younger brothers were chosen to rule. And the Hebrew people sort of all agreed there had to be more going on here than just like an interesting plot twist or a way to prove God has power. They began to see this as revelation. These events were teaching them about the nature of God, what it meant to be God's people. So over time, these strange inversions came to symbolize Israel's very identity, how they saw themselves. And they're just a bunch of younger brothers and barren women. They're a bunch of ragamuffins and underdogs. And so their God must be the God of ragamuffins and underdogs. Women in general actually came to represent Israel because in that day and time, they were always marginalized and vulnerable. Think how often women save the day for Israel. And this is not the norm in ancient origin stories. But for Israel, barren women and younger brothers were always constantly called upon to save the day, not in spite of their vulnerabilities, but somehow because of them. And since Israel believed that their vocation was to image this invisible God, they came to believe that must be what God is actually like. When God used barren women and younger sons, this was not a plot twist. This was revelation. And so early on, the Israelite people decided God's nature must be reflected in very particular ways by those on the margins who were outside the mainstream, especially with regard to like their character, their goodness. The left out, the left behind, the scrappy underdogs and ragamuffins were constantly thrown into these situations they were not prepared for, like those first sons. They lacked experience, size, strength, education, grooming. They were strugglers, but their struggle had given them like this deep character. They were deficient in some obvious ways, though, and this always made them really vulnerable. And this wasn't, typically desirable for a leader in the ancient world. That's not what you want. But God seemed to think somehow their vulnerability made them perfect for the task of leadership. And this came to define not just the way they saw their leaders, but the Hebrew idea of God, that God chose vulnerable leaders because God was a vulnerable God, which meant that their God could love and was worthy of love. Because vulnerability is required for love. To love somebody, it's always a risk. They can hurt you. And they came to say only this kind of God could truly love, and especially love such a ragamuffin people. And so all of this is kind of running in the background of our story today. It starts in Genesis 25. When the time for her delivery came, there were twins in her womb. The first to come out was reddish and covered all over with hair, like a coat. So they named him Esau, which means like completely formed. Like that's the point of the hair, having hair already. Like he was a little adult already. Then his brother emerged with his hand holding Esau's heel. So he was called Yaakov or Jacob, which means heels or grasping the heels. Isaac, we're told, was 60 years old when she bore them, and the boys grew, and Esau became a skillful hunter, an outdoorsman, while Jacob was a quiet man who stayed in the tents. Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game. Rebekah favored Jacob, and we all know why, because of this moment with God. Next comes his story. Esau's been out hunting, because that's what he loves to do. He comes home just starving. Jacob's in among the tents, cooking dinner, and Esau finds him and begs him for a bowl of soup. And Jacob says, I'll trade you some soup for your birthright. And Esau's like, come on, man, I'm starving, give me some soup. And Jacob says, some soup for your birthright. And Esau agrees. They even swear to it officially, which obviously kind of reveals Esau to be rash and foolish. But I'm actually more interested in what this says about Jacob. I mean, his brother comes home and asks to share in some food, and the first thing that comes to mind is, yeah, for your birthright. Like, who does this? Like, how long had he been plotting and scheming for this moment? Like, did he know? Did he know already Esau was just like not equipped to lead the family? Was he jealous and lying in wait? Had Rebekah prepped him for a moment like this? We don't know. We just know that it worked. The next time we hear from them, the boys are 40 years old. Esau's a man's man, a hunter, the first son, the father's favorite. He has these 2 Hittite wives who cause trouble for everyone. Jacob is unmarried, kind of a mama's boy. He's quiet, biding his time, fretting about his future. Isaac, we're told, is blind. He can't see. And it sort of freaks him out. He's just convinced the whole time, almost the whole story, Isaac's convinced he's gonna die. He's like a total hypochondriac. He lived like 20, 30 more years convinced that he's gonna die every day. He's like Red Fox from Sanford and Sons. Remember, like, oh, it's a big one. It's Elizabeth, I'm coming, right? That is totally Isaac in this story. Like for 3 decades. And so he calls to Esau and says, like, I'm having heart palpitations. Like, come hunt some game, cook it up. It'll be our last time together. He probably just wanted a meal, but this was his ploy. He says, I'll give you, if you do this, I'll give you my blessing, which for them was a huge deal. The father's blessing had power. It meant prosperity. So Esau would be more prosperous. Rebekah overhears this, and she's the only one who has heard from God in this part of the story. And all God has told her is the younger has to rule. He will rule the people. So now she's like, if he doesn't get the blessing, what happens to the people? God had told her he would lead. And this was the answer to her question, why am I here? What is my life? And if Esau gets that blessing, when Jacob leads the people of God, Esau's family will be more powerful. And so Rebekah grabs Jacob. She says, your father's going to give Isaac his blessing. If it's done, it can't be undone. Then we pick up the story, Genesis 27. Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare some tasty food for your father the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat so that he may give you his blessing before he dies. Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, but my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing. His mother said to him, my son, let the curse fall on me. She's taking so much risk. Just do what I say and go get them for me. So they cooked the food. They got some of Esau's clothes and dressed Jacob up in them. Rebekah covered, we're told, his arms and the back of his neck in the skin of young goats, so he'd feel all hairy if his father touched him. Took the food in to his father. Isaac's immediately suspicious. He says, you smell like Esau, but you sound like Jacob. And he pulled him close by the back of the neck, as was the custom. And he became convinced. They eat the meal together, and then Isaac blesses the wrong son, saying, you'll have abundance and fortune. Nations will serve you. You'll be Lord over the family and over all your brothers. And then Jacob leaves. And no sooner is he out the door and around the corner than Esau shows up. And father and favorite son discover the ruse. And Isaac says, I don't know what to tell you, man. I already gave my blessing away. And it can't be undone. And Esau erupts in anger. First, he took my birthright with the soup, now my blessing. And then there's this actually really heart-wrenching scene where Esau is weeping and crying, what about me, my father? Haven't you reserved any blessing for me? Will you leave me with nothing? Bless me too, my father. You can almost tell it's like the first time this chosen first son has ever faced any kind of adversity. And so Isaac blessed him too, but it wasn't the same blessing. And Esau resolved to kill Jacob, his brother, just as soon as Isaac died. Rebekah found out about this, and so she packed up Jacob and sent him away to live with her brother Laban in Haran. And when you read the story, it's weird. You get this sense that over everything, even the deceptions, that God has to be guiding these events. Using the brokenness of these really broken people, like an older brother's privilege, a father's blindness, a mother's conniving, a younger brother's ambition, all of them in conflict with each other, and really the story deeply in conflict with the way of the cultures around them. And so what the Israelites took from this story, the lesson for them, was that their God must be in conflict with the way the world is typically organized. Their God opposes privilege and favoritism and first sons and inherited wealth. The primogeniture practice is actually undermined by the story of Jacob. This God who lavishes blessings on the younger brother. And so the people of God came to believe that God's blessing is not distributed according to birth order or strength or fertility. God's blessing is for all people who are willing to be vulnerable and to love. And to make it obvious, God blesses Jacob instead of Esau, and God uses Rebekah instead of Isaac to lead the family in this crucial moment. And it won't be the last time God uses Israel to kind of subvert the cultures of the world. Israel's entire narrative really is deeply subversive. God is constantly blessing barren women and younger brothers and upsetting the natural order of things to show that everyone can play a part in this story. These characters are always so interesting to me. I mean, there's Rebekah, who marries into this family, but feels so much responsibility to see it continue. Like when God says there are two nations growing in your womb, God's not saying, look how blessed you will be. God's saying, both sons can't rule my people. And you got to make sure the younger one comes out on top. It's a tall ask. The role that she will play in this deception is just tied back to this moment with God, where she heard God's voice very early on in the story. And without Rebekah being faithful to that moment, the story would have gone a very different way, not the way that God wanted. And then there's Esau. I've told you this before. Sometimes when I'm reading scriptures, I cast them in my head like a movie or something. I always cast Esau as Sonny Corleone from The Godfather. James Caan, you know. He's just like strong and tough, but he's rash and stupid. He does foolish things like trade away his birthright for a bowl of soup. And he's sort of ruled by his appetites. Just do what you want, forget the consequences. And he's the eldest son, so he's used to getting away with it. And he's grown up kind of exploiting his own privilege. And he will be a bad Don, a bad leader. He needs to suffer more so he can find a little character. You think of Jacob, I always cast him as Michael Corleone, Al Pacino. Mama's favorite. Calm, calculating, but he's on the sidelines of the family, right? At first, kind of a non-factor. While Esau's off hunting and sleeping with Hittite women, Jacob stays home among the tents, which also means Jacob knows everyone in the clan, in a way that Esau doesn't. He knows who's trustworthy and who's not, who's smart, who's shiftless. And he learns from Rebekah instead of Isaac about how to be a leader, which means that he's learning how to lead without power, how to listen, how to see, how to discern, how to think, how to strategize. And he's watched Esau play the alpha male, thinking, like, what is going to happen to this family if he becomes the Don? We are all dead if that happens. Jacob frets. He worries about the family's future. And he knows that strength will not win the day. They're not a powerful enough family for that. And then Jacob's a bit of a scoundrel. You know, he's a trickster. Not above swindling people to get what he wants, take advantage of their weakness. And then there's Isaac. And I know he's the father, but to me, Isaac is Fredo, the Fredo of the family. Sorry, none of this makes sense if you've never seen The Godfather. It's funny that a lot of the Jewish rabbis I've read say that the way they tell the story is Isaac never really recovered from when Abram bound him to that altar. He could never see right because he was always weeping, they said. He was blinded by his own pain and trauma. And this physical blindness is symbolic of a deeper spiritual kind of existential blindness. He can't see the truth about even his own two sons, and so he just unthinkingly follows the primogeniture thing, completely ignoring the danger of Esau and the potential of Jacob. And so his blindness sort of puts the whole family at risk. He's totally, it's Fredo. And these are such strange characters to include in your like ancestral narratives, you know? Think about how different Israel's founding fathers and mothers are compared to like the American founding fathers. I mean, when we learned in school about George Washington, we learned about his bravery and sacrifice and I cannot tell a lie kind of stuff. They didn't say anything about his flaws or that he was a slaveholder, that when he died from a superstition around bloodletting, you know. The monuments in D.C., they're designed to resemble ancient Greek temples. They house the gods, and then inside them are the American founding fathers. They're treated like gods, and these monuments could be in ancient Greece. Their stories are kind of whitewashed and sanitized. The Israelites didn't do that with their stories. They never whitewashed their ancestral narratives. These are deeply flawed people in need of grace. And so they sort of have the ring of truth. And the Hebrew people came to have this deep conviction that their flaws served a purpose. Because of their brokenness and the brokenness of their ancestral families, they came to believe God's patience and forgiveness revealed that their God was a God of grace, which was and is deeply disruptive to the cultures of the world. And until they said it, nobody had ever really said this about a God. But they thought, if God can use these really broken people, a privileged older brother and a blind father and a conniving mother and an ambitious younger brother, if God could use them, maybe God was determined to use broken things, flawed things. And this meant that God was available to everyone, that everyone's life could matter, no matter how broken. It meant that God had made God's vulnerable to a broken people, that even though they had failed, this God was graceful. God never stopped loving them and calling them and working with them, working through them, calling them to peace. And they came to see God wasn't using them in spite of their flaws, but because of them. To image God, to show the world what God's really like. That God's a God who inhabits weakness, who moves toward human brokenness, not away from it. God is a God of vulnerability and grace. And the ancient Israelites, there was a cost to this. They had to really struggle for this insight that God's a God of grace. That God's grace is not based on privilege or dominance or strength or wealth or power. The powerful don't need God. They just use God to manipulate people and enrich themselves. It's the broken ones. That's who needs God. The desperate. They're the ones who listen to God's voice and respond in faith, because an openness to God is rooted in human frailty and need. And this is not how the kingdoms of the world operate. So this God will lead the people of God against the grain of the culture over and over. God needs God's people to be formed in kind of what we around here call a ragamuffin narrative of solidarity with barren women and younger brothers, with unconventional people, like however the culture you live in defines unconventional. The people who don't look right, don't fit into the norm. They don't love the right gender or weren't born in the right country or don't care about the right political whatever. It's always the wrong people. However our world defines that God's like, okay, grab that person. They've been excluded. They've been blamed and scapegoated. They are suffering. They're going to be our teacher in this moment. God has this deep solidarity with the excluded. In fact, you know who the hero of the story is? Who's the godfather in this? It's not Jacob or Esau. It's not Isaac. It's Rebekah. She's the one. She's the hero. This brave woman who in her memory of this moment long ago with God, all those years earlier, with their children fighting and wrestling in her room, making her so afraid, and the voice of God saying, the older has to serve the younger. She risked everything. She lost everything. She lost her husband's trust. She lost her older son. Esau never forgave her. She even lost Jacob, her baby. She had to send him away. She never saw him again for the rest of her life. Even when she's packing him up to go, she's like, I've lost one son already. I can't lose you too. Rebekah lost everything to make sure that her adopted family would continue. She's the star of the show, who risked everything, gave everything to serve God's purposes. This woman with no real power acts fearlessly to subvert a culture of privilege and status and favoritism and outward appearances. And her story, the Hebrew people teach us, her story tells us that our God is like this. Our God is the God of the left out and the left behind. It's not by might and not by power, but by my Spirit that the kingdom comes. God's preference is not for the powerful, the privileged, or the dominant, but rather, in the words of the Apostle Paul, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of the world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are. That's what this God is like. And as we think about the story, if you just step back, hold it all, I wonder who you identify with most. Which character? Maybe you feel blind like Isaac, traumatized by past abuses, too afraid to ever take a chance and go against the grain of a culture. Or maybe you feel overlooked like Jacob, tempted by bitterness, longing to play a meaningful role, but feeling too much like a scoundrel. Maybe you identify with Esau. I kind of think as Americans, we should all identify with Esau at least a little bit, having every privilege, education, money, strength, opportunity, kind of assuming we should come out on top, lacking wisdom and humility. We all got a little Esau in us, trading away our birthright for just immediate gratification, appetites and desires. Fearful, wanting to stay on top, but not wanting to pay the price, and then just filled with grievance when God stands with those on the margins. And I wonder what it would take for us to identify with Rebekah, to actually risk to be part of the people of God, part of God's story. Take a risk to experience some kind of loss in order to help birth the kingdom of God into our day and our time. To kind of take part in a radical reversal of power and privilege. This is deep in the heritage of what it means to be a Christian. One of my favorite writers, theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, was writing during World War II, very similar cultural moment. And he once said, Christianity preaches the infinite worth of that which is seemingly worthless, and the infinite worthlessness of that which is seemingly so valued. It's a profound insight. And that's what Rebekah knew. And that's why God used her. And I wonder what God could do with all of us if we knew the infinite worth of that which seems so worthless. Just stop chasing after the worthlessness of what is so valued by so much of our culture. I mean, God chose Israel, the lowliest family and nation, to shame the wise and the powerful. God chose Rebekah, a barren woman with no power and very little influence. God chose Jacob, the second son, an afterthought, an introvert. God chose all of these underdogs, and God chooses you and me, broken and flawed though we are, to bring about God's purposes in the world. God has chosen to act through the ragamuffins because God has chosen the foolish things to shame the wise. So why not be a holy fool, God chooses the weak things to shame the strong. So why hide our weakness? God chose the lowly and despised things and the things that are not. So surely God can use people like you and me to bring about God's kingdom. Surely we can help subvert the culture of, just consumption and privilege and dominance that we know leaves way too many people out of God's blessing. Surely we can oppose injustice and fight back against intolerance and racism and brutality and vengeance, the kind of stuff that thrives on fear and hatred and violence. We are Christians. And Christianity preaches the infinite worth of that which is seemingly worthless and the infinite worthlessness of that which seems so valuable to the rest of our world. I think if Rebekah's life teaches us anything, it teaches us that even broken people like you and me can be a conduit of God's blessing to the world. Amen? Let's pray. Oh God, that we could see the infinite worth of things that just seem so worthless, and the infinite worthlessness of that which is so valued in our world. We confess our tendency to trade our birthright as your people for this immediate gratification, our own appetites and desires, to assuage our fears, to nurse our grievances, our sense of loss. Please help us see that the loss is the good stuff. The struggle and brokenness, this is where you do your thing. So we don't have to be afraid to feel weak and broken. And because of you, when we are weak, we are strong. Amen.